don't let fear cripple you. Don't let fear be the reason that you're 50 and you're talking about what you could have done when you were 25.
Welcome to the show, Obidi. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sophia. I'm really excited to get to talking today.
Me too. And just start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what you do.
My name is Obidi Nzeribe. I am born and raised in Nigeria, the eastern part of Nigeria to be specific, Owerri. If we're being even more specific, I moved to the US in 2014 to pursue a degree in chemical engineering. Graduated with my bachelor's in chemical engineering. And then I became a photographer, and I've been living in Los Angeles as a fashion and commercial photographer since 2021.
I love that story. And for those people unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe your artistic style as a photographer?
I like to say that there's a lot of nostalgia in what I do. A lot of work that I create now, I find myself going back to memories from being a child and trying to recreate that. It's a lot of going back to what I was raised on, the references that I saw growing up. There's a lot of nostalgia. It's eclectic. I think those are the words I'll use to describe my work. Eclectic, warm, nostalgic. I like to play with colors a lot, if that makes sense. I'm just kind of rambling here.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And I love your color palettes.
Thank you.
So like you mentioned, you relocated from Nigeria to the US in 2014.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear more about your background and how that transition was like for you.
I don't really remember having any major hiccups at first because growing up in Nigeria, there's already like a lot of American media that we consume. So I sort of knew what to expect when I moved here to the States. So it wasn't that big of a transition for me. I moved here, I moved to Texas. The main differences that I saw was mainly in social issues, like culturally, having things like race now be a factor. And that could also be said to why I started photography, because, growing up in Nigeria, a lot of the beauty references that I saw, a lot of the beauty standards that I saw were Black women and Black men, and then coming to the US and hearing that, oh, that's not quite the case. That was shocking for me at first because I couldn't quite comprehend how that was the case. So that could also be said to why I even picked up photography, because for me, it was more of we have to rewrite the wrong that has been written already, you know. There's this quote by one of my favorite Nigerian writers, Chinua Achebe, and it's something like, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter and not the lions. It's up to us, to tell stories that matter to us. So that's how I picked up photography. You could say that me moving to the US pushed me to create.
I love that. And there's so much to unpack here. I definitely want to hear more about your storytelling. But first, I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, how you originally studied chemical engineering. So how did you choose to study chemical engineering of all fields? And how did you transition from engineering to photography?
I was a very creative kid growing up. I used to draw. I used to write books. None of them made sense, but I used to write books regardless. I remember one time my mom had said that she wishes she would have published a lot of the books that I wrote growing up. I mean, they weren't really that good, but I've always been encouraged to create and to write and to draw as well. I also was really in love with chemistry, and I just love to know how things work. I love to take things apart, and I love to try to like make things. And to me, chemistry was a form of creation. It's a form of creation. You get to mix things and you get to come up with like new solutions, and you get to solve equations. Like, it was really fun for me growing up. I know most of my Nigerian peers, their parents probably forced them to go into like a certain field, being a doctor or being a lawyer or being like an engineer. But I actually chose to do this. I started off studying computer science because I wanted to write code. But then I switched after my first semester back to chemical engineering, and it was always what I wanted to do. It was never forced on me. In high school, I read chemistry textbooks for fun, like that was who I was. But then something also happened. I think it was probably around like 15, 16 was when I started to notice fashion. And I just knew that I wanted to have a role in fashion in some sense. And I sketch, like I still, sketch designs from time to time. But around 15, 16, that's when I started taking my dad's camera and playing with it. And I would have my little sister get dolled up and I'll take photos of her and I'll post it on Facebook. So that's how I started getting into photography. And then I came to the States, and my first year here, I bought my first camera and I just started going around to friends and going around to like different school organizations to take photos for them for free. At first, when I got a camera, I didn't really know what direction it was that I wanted to go with photography. I did baby photography, I did events, I did sports, I did it all. But I had a friend, her name is Esther, and she also wanted to model. So her and I started planning photo shoots and we watched America's Next Top Model. And we would just go out there and plan different crazy photo shoots. And by my junior year, that's when I realized that, okay, I actually would really love to do photography full time. But then I went to grad school, of course, because why not? And 2020 was when I was like, okay, I have to drop out. I have to like figure this out before life takes over.
So, what happened in 2020? Was there a specific turning point when you realized that this wasn't the right path and you decided to make a change?
I like to say it was the pandemic, but I feel like a lot of things happened before the pandemic that made me really question what I was doing. I had to say no to a lot of jobs because they were not in states, and I had finals or I had midterms or I had like homework that was due, or I had to study. And I realized that I can't have my cake and eat it in this situation. Like I had to dedicate my time and my commitment to something. And then the pandemic was the ultimate reset that we all were forced to have. I think being forced to experience a global pandemic really made me think things through and made me realize that I can always go back to school. I'd like to believe that my brain is only going to get sharper and sharper and sharper as I age. But photography, I want to do this while I'm still young, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. But what was it about the pandemic that made you reflect on your career so much? Did you
It
just have more
was
time to think, or how did you get this epiphany that you really want to be a photographer?
more time to think, yes, but also it's something about being faced with your mortality that makes you question things. I didn't have COVID per se. I had it one time. I didn't have any symptoms, but it's just something about people lost loved ones. People passed away for not just COVID, but for different reasons during that time. So for me, it was just more of I am itching to do this, and I didn't want it to be that I lived my life not doing what I wanted, and like focusing on something that wasn't pleasing me anymore. You could say that it was selfish, like in a sense, I had to make a really selfish decision to drop out and do this full time because it was more. about listening to what my desires were and what I wanted to do and what my passion was now.
But why did you think that it would be more selfish to study photography or be a photographer?
When you're Nigerian, there's this expectation, trust in you that, you're meant to do this and do that and, following this path. And for me, I guess there's also this sense of guilt that I felt because it's my parents paid for my tuition to come to like the States and get this degree and then for me to just drop out. But I've spoken to my parents about this and they're fine. They're very supportive of me. As long as I'm fine, I'm making my money. I'm not like starving or, dying on the streets. They're fine with it. So it was more me trying to live up to this expectations because I also have friends and I know people who have gone in the same direction as me, who have left a more stable professional field for something more creative. And it hasn't been received that well by family and loved ones because there's this fear of the unknown. There's this fear of how are you going to eat, how are you going to survive, how are you going to feed yourself. I guess I have those fears sometimes, but my drive to create is bigger than that fear. So for me it was just a no-brainer for me to follow my dreams. I also just didn't want to be 50 and talking about how, oh, I used to do photography, but I just never committed to it. Like I want to live my life fully.
I can relate to so many of the things that you just said, and it can be so hard to follow your passion and your heart when there are so many expectations out there.
So many.
So how did you break the news about you dropping out to your friends and family, and what was their initial reaction?
Luckily for me, it was grad school, of course, when COVID happened and classes moved online. That was the Trojan horse that I used to deliver the message because I was like, okay, tuition is the same. It makes no sense because I'm going to be learning from the comfort of my home. There's no reason for me to pay this. It was like $16,000 each semester. And then the plan was, of course, to take 1 year off and, figure things out, save money, then go back to school. But then 1 year went by and I moved to LA. Jobs just started to come in and it didn't make sense to go back now. I'm here. So might as well ride it out till the wheels fall off.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. And I actually have quite a few friends who also dropped out during the pandemic because it just didn't make any sense to pay those tuition fees when everything was online. So after deciding to pursue photography full time, what steps did you take to start working toward your goals?
In a way, you could say that I started taking the steps before I even started pursuing photography full time. For example, how I had my friend and we were doing fashion photo shoots back then. I met a lot of other photographers on social media. And what I did really was I planned trips with these photographers and I came out here and I visited them. We did photo shoots with like models and stylists and makeup artists in California. So what that did for me was that while I was in Texas, I was building a network out here. And so eventually it happened that I was flying out here for work. I had people that would pay for my flights and have me out here to shoot. When I realized that that was one way to build a network here, what I started doing was more targeted outreach. I would reach out to, certain like stylists and certain makeup artists and like certain models and we would shoot. And of course, when they would share it, it would also be shared with their followers. And from there, I got more clients from there. So it's just about knowing how to position your work to be seen by the right people. I try to reach out to a lot of photography agencies when I first moved out here, and they all said the same thing. We like your work, but you don't have any notable faces on there yet. It didn't rub me the wrong way that they said that, because I got that it was business, like it's business. You have to know that this photographer is marketable before you can manage them. So what that did for me was that I started placing myself in position to be seen by notable faces. It was more of a strategic thing that I did. So by the time that I was in grad school, I was already getting requests to shoot campaigns and stuff here. Um, and I was already having to fly out here. So a lot of times I would say no to some things because of school. But when I moved here, it was also, again, simple because I already had that base. I already had that solid connection. So I was subconsciously planning my move before I moved. I didn't know that I was planning it, but I was planning it because I made almost zero connections in New York, but here in Los Angeles, I made all the connections.
That is so interesting because, I mean, you've lived in Nigeria and then in the US, you've lived in Dallas and then LA. So,
And Arkansas.
oh, okay. So, in what ways does location play a role in your creative project?
In a big way, because back in Arkansas, I had my friend, and she's a model, but there aren't really that many creatives there. And of course, like there's a push for uniformity and less for creative expression. Texas was a little bit more free in terms of creative expression. Because I was in Denton, Texas for some time before I moved to like Dallas proper. And Denton is a college town, and there's a lot of college kids there, a lot of creatives, a lot of photographers too. And there was this creative community there. Same with Texas as well. We used to have photo meetups, and photo meetups were, basically photographers, models, sometimes stylists even show up, would meet somewhere, and everyone just shoots. Everyone just starts taking photos. That was how Texas was. But then when I moved to Los Angeles, it was almost like a different level of creative expression, because you see it with people like in their day-to-day lives. It's ingrained in them. Everyone is very expressive, and there's also a huge network of people to pull from. There's always a makeup artist, there's always a photographer, there's always a model, there's graphic designers, there's videographers, whoever you want. And some might think that, oh, like there's a saturation of creatives, and the market must be difficult, and that is true, but it also helps motivate me to be more creative because I'm competitive. And if I see someone doing their best, I also want to do my best as well. Seeing people do good inspires me to also like want to get out there and like do my best. So being here definitely is great for my creative juices.
Yeah, definitely. LA is known for being such a competitive market. And I was just about to ask you, how do you stand out among so many talented photographers?
So as much as I say that I get inspired by people being their best selves, I also try to make sure that I'm focused on what's on my plate. I'm trying to tell stories that make sense to me and not just follow the trends. Because I feel that a lot of times people just follow a trend. And the issue with trends is that they have such a short shelf life. The main way that I try to stand out is just to be myself and just being true to my story and not just wanting to shoot something because it's trendy and cool, but shooting something and shooting it from a point of view that is uniquely me.
I love that you mentioned being intentional. So how did you first discover your artistic style, and what steps did you take to develop it?
When I first started photography, you know how I said that I did babies, I did events, I did weddings, I did everything. And then I found out that fashion and more conceptual art was more what I wanted to do. Summer 2017, I was shooting the whole time. I was shooting maybe 10 times a week,
Oh,
sometimes like multiple shoots a day. I'll find models online and would set up shoots. And the main thing that I did was I tried to replicate a lot of photos that I liked. So a lot of photo shoots that I liked, I'll take a screenshot and I'll send it to like the model and we'll try to recreate that same exact photo. And there's not much creativity that goes into doing that. But what I found out or what I learned was that while I was doing that, I started to tweak things and I was like, Okay, I like how they did this, but I think that I would have done it this way." And that's how I started to build my voice from seeing how people are doing things and going like, okay, I can do this and do it my way. Then from doing that, I started to build stories from scratch because now I have like a foundation of how these things are constructed. Because I think that before you really get into photography, like a fashion shoot seems daunting, having to put together a cohesive look, like with hair, with makeup, with styling, and figuring out like a story and the posing and stuff like that. But after a while, it became second nature for me. So that's how I was able to build up that style.
yeah, I mean, I guess that is such a good way to learn. And I was actually reading some of your past interviews, and in one of them, you mentioned that your work is an escape. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
That was the interview that I did with We Present, I believe. We were talking about nostalgia, like I mentioned earlier, it's an escape because that was earlier this year. And I was talking about how a lot of times with Black creatives, we're kind of pigeonholed into creating the same type of work about like trauma and about um, sad experiences. And my work is more of an escape. My work is fantasy. It's ethereal. Like it's meant to make you feel warm and feel nostalgic.
So, what is that nostalgia all about? Where are you longing for?
I guess in a sense you could say home, because I keep trying to recreate these things that I saw growing up, these feelings that I had growing up. In a sense, you could say I'm longing for home and to have like a sense of home be shown in my work, you know, because like I said, nostalgia has a way of skewing our perspective on the past. And, it's all the good memories packaged in like a ribbon. So I'm trying to have that same effect on people with my work. It's not even necessarily just nostalgia for me. It's when you're looking at my work, I want you to also feel something nostalgic about it. I want you to look at my work and think, oh, like this reminds me of when I was a kid and I used to dream about this, or this reminds me of last week when I saw the skies and they were blue and there was someone standing there. Like um I want people to yearn for something when they see my work.
And you mentioned home, and you've lived in so many places. So, I have to ask, where is home to you nowadays?
I don't even know the answer to that question because home for me has always been a very vague place Because, of course, I have my family at my home where I grew up in Nigeria. At 12, I left and went to boarding school, and I was there till I was 17, so that could also be home as well. And then I was in Texas, in Arkansas, and now Los Angeles. It's corny, but home is where the heart is. You can see a lot of those references within my work. You can see my Nigerian references. You can see a little bit of my Southern USA references. You can also see my love for fashion within my work. That could also just be home for me. It's a combination of so many things that I love being told through the story of fashion.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. So now looking back and reflecting on your journey, what do you think have been the key decisions that have brought you to where you are today?
To be honest, there have been so many. It's been step after step. I, of course, didn't plan to come to the States at first when I finished high school. That wasn't the plan, but I eventually applied and I got in. And my first semester of school, I saved my paychecks and bought a camera. And then just dropping out of school, I would say would be the biggest one that brought me here. Because what dropping out of school did for me was that it removed my safety net. And I think with my safety net gone, that pushed me do to to be the best that I can be at what I'm doing right now. School wasn't my backup at first. School was my first plan. Photography was not even a backup, but as my love for it grew, it became my first plan. And then school started feeling like my backup plan. So dropping out for me was, when you throw a baby in the pool to learn how to swim and you just like swim, learn. That was me, I had to jump into the waters without like any life vest. And it really pushed me to do my best because failure was not an option. There was no way that I was going to come out here and fail within my first year. But I've also made peace with failure if that happens because I've learned to learn from my failures rather than to hyperfixate on them.
Now, speaking of failure, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on success. So, what does success mean to you, and what makes life meaningful in your view?
I have a very difficult relationship with success. A lot of times I see success as a distraction because we're not at the end yet. I like to call it toxic humility that I have, where I struggle to accept success, because I always feel that we're not at the end of the road yet. So there's really no need to like celebrate those small victories, those small wins. I'm also learning that I have to celebrate those small wins and those successes from time to time. So many times I get stuff or like I book a job and I'm not really as phased by it, but when I fail something, I tend to like focus on it. I'm just like, oh my God, you failed that. But when I do really good, I don't focus on it that much. So I'm learning to focus on my success and to let it pave the way for me. I actually never realize my successes till I'm failing, which is so funny because that's when I look back and I'm like, oh, remember when you were doing this and you were doing that? We need to go back to that time. But I also remember how I felt during that time and how there was so much self doubt and there was so much telling myself to just shut up and like focus on the work and stop letting all the extra things distract you. But it's not extra things, these are moments that you should celebrate and you should savor, you should enjoy it. So I am learning, to embrace my success because I've learned to embrace my failures. I should also learn to embrace my success.
It's actually a really good reminder of how failure can be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so many times when something's not going right, back in the day, I used to always be down and out about my failures. But now I just look back at whatever I failed at and I try to break it down. It's that chemical engineering brain showing up again. I try to break it apart and I'm like, okay, so this is where you possibly went wrong. You did too much of this. You need to do more of this, or you need to go like in a different direction or something. That's how I treat my failures. And I think I need to start treating my successes that way. Just kind of break it down, see what worked, see what that I thought would work that might not have worked, and just kind of go about it that way.
That's such a good advice because there's so much we can learn from both our failures and our successes.
So much. Life experiences teach you so much. Because someone could say to you, hey, Sophia, don't touch fire, it's hot. And you'll be like, no, it's not hot. And then you touch it and then it burns you. And that's when you're like, okay, so fire is hot. Got it. And next time you won't touch fire. Sometimes you have to go through something to really like value that experience and for it to like really stick with you. So that's why I've learned not to be so down and out about my failures. And also, when you hear the stories of so many other successful people, none of them got it their first go, or most of them, some of them did, most of them didn't. It's also important in this journey, especially as a creative, to really focus on your journey and to not let what other people are doing affect how you feel about what you're doing. Because I could look at so many other photographers who have been shooting for less than I have, who have more opportunities, and I could let that break me down, but that doesn't. And I'm sure that there are other photographers that have been shooting for longer than I have that could look at me and be like, oh, this guy just started and he's already doing this. But I think it's really important to remember that you're not me and I'm not you. And, we bring different things to the table, and you shouldn't let what I'm bringing to the table diminish your value and vice versa as well,
Definitely, 100%. Before we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will take from today's chat?
Be intentional with your work and with what you're doing. Of course, have fun with it, but if you have a goal in mind, you have to be intentional to achieve your goals. Make sure you're making the right moves. You're also doing things that make sense to who you are and things that come naturally to you. Also, something else I would say is to not be afraid to push yourself. Don't be afraid to take those leaps, drop out of school if you have to, or go back to school if you have to. Like, just don't be afraid to try new things. The worst that can happen is you fail. And if you fail, you learn from your failures and you keep going. You don't die. You don't go to jail. I mean, sometimes. Depends on what you're doing. You won't go to jail or you won't die. But, just don't let fear cripple you. Don't let fear be the reason that you're 50 and you're talking about what you could have done when you were 25. That's what I hope people take away from this.
Absolutely. I love that answer. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, Obidi Nzeribe, and on Instagram, Obidi Nzeribe as well. .com for my website. But yeah, OBIDINZERIBE. What a name.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I will add all those in the show notes. Thank you so much, Obidi, for your time today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I had a great time talking with you.